Okay, welcome everybody. We're so glad to have great panelists here, a great host, and I just wanted to do a quick introduction. My name is Brent Thurgood. I'm the head of operations at Enerflo, and thank you so much for joining our second session of SolarConnect. We're featuring Sonobe CEO and co-founder Scott Hyde, our friend, and everyone else on here is actually friends of ours too. Scott will be the panel moderator and joined by panelists Bob Fox from Summit Solar, Robbie Edge from Empower, and Venki Sundaresan from SunPower. Incredible lineup. Just a few quick housekeeping notes and then we'll get started. And with that, we'll hand it over to Scott. Thanks, you
Hey,
guys.
thanks, Brent. Really excited to be here and have such a talented panel to speak with us about data and how it relates to installers and as a whole. As a quick sort of intro, I remember one of my first jobs in solar. I went to this leadership retreat and I was sitting next to this guy who'd become a good friend of mine. And he said, I wish that above everyone's head was like a hologram telling us how many deals they sold so I should know if I should pay attention to that guy or not. What he says. And I thought, man, that would be pretty interesting if that actually happened. So in kind of the spirit of that, we have a really talented group, and I want people to understand your background and where you come from so that the things that you say carry some weight. So just because of the way it's lined up on my screen, Bob, I'm going to start with you and then go to Venki and then Robbie. If you guys wouldn't mind just spending 1 or 2 minutes giving a brief history of how you got into solar, what you currently do today, and just some information about why we should all care about listening to what you have to say.
Yeah, no, that's great. And thank you for having me on this webinar. So my name is Bob Fox. I am the Vice President of Revenue Operations for Summit Energy Group. I joined the organization about 6 years ago. And prior to that, I was in private equity, and I reviewed a couple of jobs that were seeking capital for solar. And in the due diligence process, I realized all of the opportunities that exist in the marketplace. And so in 2019, I made the jump to Summit and have been here since.
So you come more from a financial background, which hates data. There's no data ever to in finance. So.
None at all. None at all. Yep.
How about you, Venki? You're next on my.
All right. Morning, everyone. And my name is Venki Sundaresan. I'm a senior vice president in SunPower, the new SunPower, we call it sometimes. And so what I do, I'm head of IT, software, and design, including permits and proposal designs and the whole 9 yards around it. I've been in the solar industry since 2022 with Enphase, managing and building up Solargraph, and then now with SunPower in dealing with all the field level issues. Prior to that, I was in Silicon Valley with Cypress Semiconductor for about 17 years. Prior to that, I was with Digital for 15 years in Boston. I'm a technologist, and I love technology and the renewable energy play in solar.
So data is pretty new for you as well.
Of course.
I think with that kind of engineering background and technology background, it might be maybe your middle name, we should change it to something that's just data scientist.
I'll ask AI to come with a name for me.
Be careful which one you choose. They all sound
I
almost
know,
the same,
I know.
so. And make sure they have a double dash in there so we know it's coming from ChatGPT. Robbie, how about you?
Yeah, Scott, appreciate you guys having me on today. My name is Robbie Edge. I'm one of the managing partners of Empower Solar. Been in the industry now for about 9 years or so. Came from a completely different background in athletics, actually, and got into the industry in sales from the sales side, and had a pretty successful stint there. And along the way, we decided as an organization or just a group of people that we felt like we had to take control of the entire customer experience, and doing that, we needed to launch an operations company as well. And so we did that about 7 years ago, to the way that Empower today. And we've grown across, I think we're installing in 17 states now. And that's been a great journey. But I come from the other side, other than these guys. I hated data all the way up until a few years ago, which I've learned to embrace and have learned how it's enabled us to grow our business successfully. So
thank you, Robbie and Venki and Bob. I appreciate it. And I think it's helpful for everyone to kind of understand your background and how you got to where you are. So today, our main topic today that we're focusing on is how data is affecting and impacting installers in particular. And on this panel, we have a representation of both some mid-size and then some larger ones, with Venki representing SunPower, who its history is rooted in the very beginnings of solar as residential rooftop solar, and then the regional space that we're trying to occupy. So I'm curious, and Robbie, since we ended with you, I'm going to start with you. And since you mentioned that data has become a newfound love of yours from before, what have you noticed about your business, and what are some of the data points that you guys started to adopt, or that you personally started to adopt, that adjusted how you approached solar?
Yeah, I'd say again, I came from a perspective of always wanting to feel out how things were going and not having an accurate depiction of what was going on in the business. Luckily, we have an entirely different group of people that help us run that. And my partner is very heavy into data analytics. How it's really helped, to be honest, is we track everything. So I think it starts there. If you're not tracking almost every single thing that's going on in your business, and when I say that, I'm talking the normal stuff that you would think of as tracking as an installer: PTO timelines. How long is it taking you from a deal review complete stage, or what we call deal review complete, to an inspection or a permit submission or interconnection? All those are normal things, but we track everything, even down to like our partner sentiment and partner success, right? So we have internal designers that handle all the designs through Aurora. We're even tracking the SLAs of how quickly those designs are picked up, how quickly they're being turned around, the frequency that they're being asked for revisions. Everything we track nowadays, no matter what that data point is. And I'd say for any installer that's looking to use data to make their business more successful, it starts with identifying all the things that you think could assist your business and assist your reputation as a business, and starting with there. And that's kind of what we did. There's probably a couple thousand data points that we track nowadays. So it's the only way to do it, to be honest, if you're going to scale.
So you've decided that it's no longer just about if it feels good. You're trying to make sure you can track that it is good.
I still argue every now and then from the feels good or feels bad perspective. That's why my entire staff has to just put me in my place every now and then and say, "Hey, look, we're not gonna measure things by how you feel, but yeah, we track everything." So
Yeah, I
they
think
can
there's
point
a
anytime
phrase.
I feel a certain way. They can point to whether or not my feeling is justified or not.
Yeah, I think they say don't let the facts get in the way of your feelings or something like that,
That's
right?
right. That's exactly right.
Bob, I saw you nodding your head as he was going through it, and I'm not skipping you, Venki, but you were in the middle, so I'm going to go back to you in the middle again, or last in this case. But Bob, you were nodding your head as he was talking about it. Do you have a similar sort of approach to that? I know you came from a different background where data was such a huge deal, right? And Bob, you're muted, by the way, so when you're talking, you're still muted. But give me kind of your thoughts on that same question.
Yeah, no, I was nodding because there's a ton of data in this business from the installer side, all the way up, starting off from the lead measures on the sales side, if you're running a sales org, and then the progression. So managing the sales teams and their performance, managing project management, and all of the touch points that happen with everyone involved, including the customers. And what I was smiling about is there are so many different ways that data is created. And one of the breakthroughs for us as a fast growth organization over the past 7 or 8 years is synthesizing the data. You'll have data coming from all different systems and different technologies, and they're good in a silo, right? And that's how you might be looking at them. But to actually make real changes to the organization, you need to bring all that data together, almost creating a storyboard. So that way, in real time, as you see little blips on the radar or changes, like Robbie was mentioning how he tracks like 1,000 data points, the data is basically useless unless you can corroborate some reasoning or take some action off of what you're observing and what you're seeing. And so that was one of the breakthroughs that we had over the past few years is, we've been creating all of this data that's living in different areas, and point in time is great. We can make point in time analysis, but really pulling it together in one data warehouse and with a strong BI tool that can actually extrapolate and tell you what is going on based on the data that's being produced.
I love that, Bob. I really do want to focus a little bit on that synthesizing the data part. I think that you're right. My experience with data over the past 5 or 6 years has been similar in that there's lots of data points and there's lots of ways to warehouse that data. And as we've learned through our whole life, you can make stats look like almost anything you want, depending on how you structure something. Learning how to synthesize the data, as you mentioned, or make it into bite-sized, manageable, digestible pieces to make things actionable in a company. I just want to double down on that question or on that thought you had. How are you doing that today? Like, how did you decide? You said you had this breakthrough, and I don't want you to necessarily give away your secret sauce, but having data versus making it digestible and actionable is very different things. So walk us through how you did that?
Yeah. So we'll look at it from the sales side. So you have your sales orgs out there pounding the pavement, putting in the work, or allegedly putting in the work, and using the front end technology like a Sales Rabbit, or we use Teros now. And within that one technology, you have tons of data that's being created. So doors knocked, the progression on the sales side before they get to a contract. And then in a different system, you have the contracts and you have the project management. The challenge is that if you're trying to solve an organizational problem, you can't really do them in a vacuum within each technology. You need to pull the data together so it can actually tell a story. So if you see high demand on the sales side, but it's not producing a lot of contracts on the project management side, then there's a problem that you need to solve, whether it's an integrity issue on the sales front, or it could be a technology issue between the two systems where maybe contracts aren't pushing over how they should, or there's some other inconsistency or some other issue that needs to be solved for. So basically being able to in real time have all of the data kind of work together in one place is so much more valuable than having, say, Sales Rabbit data within Sales Rabbit and then having to pull a spreadsheet and then having to map it and lay it over other data that you're trying to compare it to or measure it against.
And you mentioned this stuff is you're putting in a BI tool. And for our audience who may not know, and if you do, forgive me for the redundancy, but the BI is just business intelligence when there's a handful of kind of out of the box solutions that exist. Today, we're clearly talking about data as a whole, and Enerflo has released some data stuff that's our own kind of data intelligence that we believe is really powerful. But I think it's awesome, Bob. I want to keep digging into that a little bit. I don't want to avoid Venki for too long here because I know he's getting antsy or something, but I know if you got any comments about that particular question too, Venki, I'd like to hear it. But I also want to know from you as a representative of such a large organization, have you been able to synthesize some data where you've realized this is something that's really important to our company? We're honing in on one or two kind of metrics that really do tell the health of the company.
Yeah, of course. Before I get to exactly answer your question, Scott, I just want to get a level setting thing across all of us who are all listening to us in the conference as well. People think that solar is not about precision, not about engineering, not about so many things. There's a lot of misconceptions in the market, which is about solar. And solar is actually the opposite of all that. Solar is very specialized, extremely technical, and totally data driven. For example, you're analyzing how much TSRF values are you going to generate on top of your roof. That drives the amount of power you're going to generate. That drives the roof dimensions you have, drives the number of panels you're going to put. People have been thinking that, oh, this all somehow magically happens, but all of these decisions are data driven, every single one of them. Because the roof dimensions that drives the number of panels you're going to put. The panel wattage drives the number of power you're going to generate. The number of power you're going to generate drives the amount of battery that you need in your storage mechanism. So every single data point is measured, is monitored, and that's what makes a solar installation successful. Now, once that's on the front end part of it, that's where we talk about the customer and what the customer experience has been and what we are actually telling the customer as a solar installer or a solar proposal person. Then comes the part is, are we generating so much of power? Again, a whole bunch of data points comes through. Then comes the customer satisfaction. Are they satisfied with what we told them they're going to get? Are they getting what that was promised? So that's again a bunch of data points. Now this is all customer facing. Now your question you asked is, okay, what do you do with internal facing? What kind of things that you want to do and you want to measure and monitor, which actually helps your customer, my sales team, my installation team. Couple of things like comes up across my head right away is first is cycle time. Our industry is driven by cycle time. Whoever can get it done the highest quality in the fastest time is going to be the winner always. So if you take good, fast, and cheap, the rule for solar companies today is you can pick two, the other one should be obvious. So for example, you can say good and fast, but it can't be cheap. That was the older style. The new style is good, fast, and cheap is the solution. That's what CFOs want. That's what CTOs want. That's what your customer wants. So if you ask me for a North Star metric, which I'm going to be always focused on, is cycle time, because anybody can sell the same solar any different way. The differentiating factors between one solar guy to the next solar guy is how fast I can install, maintain the highest quality. That's what matters. So that means just-in-time material management, just-in-time scheduling, and making sure the bill of materials is absolutely accurate, whatever goes to the truck, and the truck runs, the unnecessary truck runs are avoided. So all these things are data-driven. All these things are North Star metrics we need to focus on. And I would say it's fascinating. Our industry is full of data, full of information. Like I think Bob absolutely said, you got to piece all these data elements together and say, here is a little bit of small analytics I can put on top of it. Doesn't need to be too much fancy stuff, but basic analytics, which tells you, okay, what's going on by a project or a group of projects or a region or a zip code or things like that, and drives some kind of behavioral change in the company. So that's where I think data-driven decision-making goes. And I would stop at that because I think the rest of the panelists also have spoken about the same thing.
Thank you, Venki. I would say that magic certainly does exist because in our online group that we're in, you and I both play Dungeons and Dragons together, so we know that magic exists.
Yeah.
But to your point, I think that it's really hard for us to not acknowledge the power of data that's existed. And I think for a large part of our solar industry's history, a lot of data has been either ignored or not really compiled in a way that's helped us tell a story.
Yep.
Even though it is very heavily
I agree.
data-focused and data-driven. But we're not, as an industry, we're not very good at,
Yep.
and haven't been very good at tracking data to make decisions. So, Robbie, I want to bounce back over to you, not to ask you if you play Dungeons and Dragons, but to figure out if the data that you're currently using, how do you use that data to make future decisions as opposed to past? And the reason I ask that is it's fairly easy for us to go, hey, I just got a Wood Mackenzie report, or I'm looking at something from Ohm Analytic that gives me historical context. But how do you use the data to give you forward thinking or forward driving information to make good decisions?
Yeah, I think one thing I'd probably say right now is I think our industry has changed drastically from our perspective from an EPC side, right? I think he said this, everybody wants it good, fast, and cheap right now, right? And if you go back 7 or 8 years when the super installers existed, the Titans, the Empires, a lot of these that were huge, a lot of times reps already knew what they were getting. It was going to be kind of a mixed bag of how the experience was going to go. And now with more regional installers, more localized installers, where sales companies are turning to those installers, a lot of those companies are doing it faster than we can a lot of times. And because we've scaled to a size where we may be a little slower in some areas. So right now we're using a lot of data to say, hey, look, we're looking at data of how things have progressed in every municipality, every utility. We're saying, hey, look, we're great, right? But we're not great here. We're not great in this area, right? We have to go find out how to adjust our business model in this specific area so that we can go grow our business and attract more sales partners in those areas, right? So we're looking at that type of stuff in the past to try to anticipate new ways to evolve our business and that can operate differently in those areas. I think historical trends, we look in things in different cycles of time, right? I think we're looking at where do we put our efforts from marketing to operations, as far as even things like warehouses and crews. We're looking at, is it in our best interest to put something here or put our effort here and continue to try to grow, or do we need to shift, right? There's so many data points that we can utilize to make those decisions. But in today's world where it's getting hyper competitive, we have to keep looking at that way to continue to build our reputation, right? Otherwise, we get staying there.
Yeah, I love that because I think that as we're trying to figure out how to grow, we're looking at our data to tell us if we're making the right decisions. And there's commonly something that has been attributed back to Paul Stefan at Goodleap, who made a comment about volume is vanity and cash is, or EBITDA is sanity and cash is king, is what this saying goes.
It's a great
And I
statement.
remember as an installer often having dealers or sales reps asked to go get something installed in some location that was in a state we were licensed in, but maybe was 100 or 200 miles away from the nearest one of our warehouses or locations. And we realized that one of the data points that mattered to us to determine profitability was volume does matter, but it matters in terms of density of a space. Do we have high density within a geographic region that we can service correctly, both from a customer satisfaction standpoint, but also from profitability? There's a couple other data points that we realized that really mattered to us, but I'm curious, and I'm coming back to you, Bob, but Robbie, I want you to bounce in on this one as well, since it came up from your comments. But when you look at some of the data points that you've gathered over time, that you've evolved over time, I imagine that one of two things has happened. One, the data that came up allowed you to ask better questions after you had some data to look at. And the second one is, once you've asked a couple good questions, what's one or two data points you realized were super crucial? Venki mentioned just cycle times as speed matters. Is there any other kind of data points you've realized these ones, I really need to know that as from a health check on my business?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I agree with Venki. Cycle time is probably the most important thing. And you get pressure from solar guides or sales reps and customers on that front. And obviously for a cash flow standpoint, it's super important. The one example that we have or that Summit has was about a year and a half ago when there's more and more pressure on the industry and the cycle time became more and more important. The question that we asked was, what is precluding or slowing a job down? And we reviewed all the SLAs on the project management front and picked apart each step of the process, both internally and with like externally. And one example that I love is solar is very different in different states and even within different states down to the AHJ level or down to the city or town level. And one of the things that we discovered was that we had a timeline set or an SLA set for pulling permits in. So after they're submitted, how long do you wait until you pull them in? And I don't know how you know, whether this group has experience in Massachusetts or not, but each town, each city has their own process and they're very political. And so if you rub people the wrong way, it can really hinder you. And so what we discovered was in an attempt to keep really good relationships with all of the HJs, with all the cities and towns, we had a longer SLA for pulling permits in to play it safe. So that way we weren't rubbing these towns and cities the wrong way. And when we discovered that, what we did is we wanted to do better and assigned SLAs down to the AHJ level. And so from a data standpoint, we created a whole module that we integrated into our project management process. And each town or each city has a unique value for what the expected return time is. So some towns have a same day SLA where you submit a permit and it's available the next day. Other towns have a 30-day. And if you try to pull it in and push them and try to expedite it, you get penalized, meaning you get thrown in the back of the line and now you're out to 60 days. And so just that one example it's more about looking inwards and asking the hard questions to your organization of what areas is there fluff or is there an opportunity to squeeze a little bit more, and then how can we squeeze most effectively so that it is a net benefit and not a detractor from project velocity and cycle time.
So would you say then that if we had a dashboard and we were looking at the stats on your company, one of the stats that matters most to you is speed to SLA?
Yeah, absolutely. Speed to SLA and like one of the next steps that we have is breaking down our expectations, like our project management expectations, down to the AHJ level and creating different comp plans and incentives to support that.
Layering in local variables on top of speed to SLA to give it more context.
You got it. Exactly.
Awesome. Robbie, anything you want to add to that? Because I'm going to turn over to Venki in a second, and he's going to obliterate all of us with data.
No, I think that's a great, fantastic example for Bob there. I'll tell you, one other idea came to my mind of things that we track very heavily now, because as Vinky said, cycle times matter to sales partners a lot. But cycle times for them doesn't always equate to cash flow and revenue realization from our perspective, especially now that we're in the TPO heavy world. And getting funding from TPO providers requires a lot more work than the old days when you were just doing a finance job. It required maybe 5 or 6 photos. And so we've looked very heavily at our processes, because when we first started with some of the TPO providers, our timelines to actually getting funded sometimes were 2 and 3 or 4 weeks to get funding on a project, because it was so complicated. We had never been up against something like that before. A lot of the data we started collecting on why were we failing picture submissions and M2 submissions, and then how do we navigate that? How do we improve on that? Really helped us. And now I think we're one of the better ones in the country at getting funded pretty quick from a lot of them. But it's all because of what we were looking at and how to improve it through data sets. And yeah, it really improved our cash flow, because if you go back a year, cash flow looked terrible. We were installing a ton, but we're getting paid a ton.
Totally.
And in the last year and a half, we've drastically switched that and have great cash flow because of that now.
That's awesome. I think that we, again, as an industry, if we're not, hopefully we have a short memory on some things and long on others. The last 3 or 4 years, more than 50% of all the solar companies went out of business, 80% in California. Venki, what lessons do we learn from that? And you're part of a company now that, as of this last month or two, you guys have been fairly aggressive in the market and trying to grow, both from acquisitions and just from sales support and sales growth. What are you doing in the market that you've learned from data in the past to shape kind of your decisions today?
First, I would like to 100% agree with Robbie and with Bob. They give some excellent points on getting TPO funding done in less than a week. And also Bob about the AHJ, last mile running, I call it, which is absolutely varying county by county in the United States. So I think those are very important elements of cycle time. And I think that's important, and that should be captured, that should be monitored like an SLA. I think that's a good insight. Now, your question is, okay, what do we learn from all these things? Nearly 50% of our companies that we know have gone under, and we are resurrecting ourselves with a new name. So what do we learn from all these things? And what happened to some of these companies? Why did we get into these kind of companies? Every company has got its own set of issues which drag them down into the hole. But generally, if you look at it as, we have to be frugal. That's rule number 1. If it's not necessary to spend, don't spend. If it is, contest your dollar, which is very important, right? Whether it is software, whether it is solutions, design tools, anything that you want. Just because you want to throw automation on something doesn't mean it's going to work. So start small, be frugal. And yeah, you will have 101. Bob talked about AI tools or business analytics tools. Dime a dozen. You just do a Google search, just do ChatGPT, any one of those guys. They'll come back and say, here are the 15 top companies. Then there will be a Gartner report which will come back and say, here are the top 5 quadrant companies you should go work for. Now, those are all for good research articles. Is it relevant for you is the question you should always ask. Is the purpose to buy a car, or is the purpose to buy a Mercedes Benz?
Are you
In my
asking Bob
opinion,
that?
no, I'm asking generally all of our solar friends should think about that first, saying that do not go down the Mercedes Benz route. That's what killed most of the companies. So just be practical, be frugal, and say good is good and good enough is good enough. And then look at being the best in class and all that thing a bit later, once you survive, and then you are able to be sustaining for some time. I think Robbie has got tons of experience in finance. So he would 100% concur with me saying that, yep, that's what I want of finance, right? You don't want to spend unnecessarily unless until you're required to spend on something. And other things, look at several cloud service providers who can do a lot of things. Payroll outsourcing could be one. Software outsourcing could be another. maybe Copilot or any of the AI-enabled software development can cut down the software development cost. Things like that. Platforms like Enerflo. I'm not giving you guys a plug, but platforms like Enerflo makes life a lot easier for a lot of solar companies. And things like that might be part of a good ecosystem, which will help you survive. But remember, end of the day, customer satisfaction is the king.
Yeah.
So if you're not getting customer satisfaction if you're measuring on an NPS scale of 70 and above, there's a good chance that you will not survive for too long.
Yeah, and just in case anyone was confused, Robbie is actually, his past was in athletics. He was a professional hiker. Bob was in finance, but
Okay.
I'm just teasing you, Robbie.
But you can just tell by the way we talk.
I think that the installers, for the most part, have been the kitchen sink, that all the problems that have come land on the installer and they got to solve it. So if we're going to shift and the industry goes, oh, we're going to sell TPO now instead of selling loans, the people who have to make that work is the installer. And if we say, no, we're going to go install in this new state, that's where the soft doors are that we're going to go sell. We're going to go install there. The installers have to make the adjustment and adjust the AHJs or adjust to the new utilities. Bob, when you're going through that and you're looking at that, what if you could, again, because we're only talking about data, but if you could speak from a data perspective to the sales folks in the world who are out selling solar, what's something you wish they understood better?
I think one thing that would be really great to understand, and I understand why it's hard to understand, but when an installer says that we can't do something, it's not because we don't want to encourage that business, and it's not because we don't want to grow or install in that area, but because of the research and the evaluation of installing 6.5 hours up into northern Maine, for example, it means a lot to the salesperson because that's their livelihood. But if you get into a pattern of making exceptions consistently, it can be a lot, it can create a lot of pain for installers. And so I think that's just one thing that I think is an important thing to understand is from a salesperson's perspective is that if an installer is telling you no, or that they can't do something in this area or with this technology or with this equipment, there's a really good reason why they're telling you no, because the installer wants the business just as much as you do, but you have to be prudent and be diligent on your decision making for the organization.
So I'm just gonna push back a little bit, and then Robbie, if you want to jump in and be his phone a friend on this, you can. But I'm gonna do the role play of a rep here and say, dude, my goal here is to get paid. And you told me that you can tell a story through data. So connect the dots for me from a data perspective about if my goal is to get paid and I go sell a job in this location you're talking about. Tell me a story from a data perspective that helps me understand why that's not a good idea.
Yeah, let's look at a job costing report and let's run a forecasted job cost. And I can show you that by installing that job as you want to sell it is going to turn the company upside down on that job by $4,000. And so that's why it is not wise to install in that area under the current conditions. And then I think it was you, Scott, that you brought it up, project density and the amount of volume that you're putting through, like throughput through a region or an area is so important because that starts to discredit that example that we just played out. Because if you build your business to support a region, then it can make sense. But if you're rolling a truck and it's a 3.5 hour drive and you need to book hotels so they can stay over, plus overtime, plus everything else, it doesn't pencil. It doesn't make sense.
Robbie, you want to tag team that one? Would you tell a story the same? You're more of a fields guy, right?
I have been through my career, but not in the last 6 or 7 years. But no, I agree. I think I would say probably the number one thing from like an EPC perspective is to be able to build a relationship with the sales partners that you have, because you have to be able to have those open discussions of saying, hey, look, yeah, could we install it? Yeah, we can. But does it make sense for us to install it? And why would we do this as a one-off? Why not have your rep go sell a deal in his backyard, right? Or an hour away versus 6 or 7 hours away, right? It doesn't really make sense. But I think you also have to have that open discussion and say, hey, look, we're open to moving more of our operations up there, right? But we have to have some commitment from your side as well, right? You can't sell one-off deals, right? We need whatever, 8 deals so we can group some installs or whatever we want to do, right? You need 20 deals so we can have a crew in that area, right? Whatever. I think you have to have those open discussions with the partners and help them understand that, as Bob laid out, this doesn't make sense from a business perspective. And it is tough. It's tough nowadays, right? Because salespeople, they really don't care what happens to the installer a lot of times anymore. There's numerous installers they can bounce around to, and they'll try to use it against you from time to time and say, hey, if you don't do it, this guy will. And sometimes you have to be smart as a business owner and say, hey, look, go do business there for that job. It's tough. It's a very tough position to be in nowadays, but I agree with Bob the way he laid it out for sure.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on this, and I'll also be one of your phone of friends because it's something I care about a lot. But I remember going back and assigning some cost values to different stages of the job as generic costs. If a site survey costs this much and design costs this much, and going through all the different milestones. And on average, every canceled job costs somewhere around $900 to a company. And if we look at that, and as an industry, we're willing to accept that our attrition rate is greater than 50%, we're asking a company to basically live on a $900 cancellation fee on half the jobs that are sold and somehow still say, hey, we're going to have this, I want you to go to this job that's really far away, or we're going to have a job that's a lower red line, or whatever that thing is. At the end of the day, if we don't provide a good customer experience because we're beat up too much on stuff, or we have no margin left, it's very difficult to provide an experience that, number one, because the market has shifted towards TPO, it's hard to get paid on a job that doesn't have customer service now with TPO. They're not like the 20% or 10% that's held back to PTO. It's not going to happen if the customer's not okay, which means that after a while, if you keep doing those kind of jobs, there's not a business left to pay anyone's commission. And so I think the long-term effect is if we don't have a more holistic approach about how we're in this together as a group, sales, installers, distribution, finance, customers, rep, it's difficult for us to continue as an industry. And the data should show that and tell the story as Bob talked about. I love the way you said that, Bob, that I want to connect my data in a way that helps me tell a story. In the end, that's all we do is we're telling a customer a story about a better job or a better utility rate they're going to get through solar, or a better cost savings they're going to get through solar. We're telling them a story all the time. We have to do a better job of showing people the data of why that makes sense. But Venki, for the last thing here, I think that, and then we're gonna, if there's any questions, we can open for that. But I just wanted to get your take on this.
On this particular topic of servicing projects which are outside of the normal. And
Well, it's not that's the example Bob gave. I just meant in general. The question was, can you tell a story of data about
it's a simple thing. I think Rob alluded to this. Bob alluded to this. It's a deal margin. The data is deal margin. Do you have a margin by the deal? And isn't it going to be a bottoms-up forecasting or bottoms-up roll-up? If you do it that way, a deal margin is going to be, okay, deal margin A, B, C, D. You keep adding up and then say, now, are you profitable or not? And so I think Bob made an important point saying that sometimes we may have to say, guys, I like your way you sell, but you know what? This is going to have no deal margin at all.
Yeah.
We might have a negative margin. And I think that level of data and coming to the front and back to the salesperson is very useful, because they're not stupid. They're not going to go sell something which is going to make us bleed in the company. Once they're aware about it, awareness is important, which means that those data elements, which typically used to be the back office side of the story, now needs to move to the front end.
Yeah.
Scott, I would say that,
no, please go, Robbie. If you're frothing at the mouth, I want to hear it.
No, I was just thinking, and to tie into Mickey, they were talking about taking that data that we see as an operations company and getting that in front of a sales partner in particular. I think even something Bob was talking about a while ago about that, even different AHJs have different timelines. And when you're speaking to your sales partners, expectation setting is no different than when you're sitting in someone's kitchen table with a homeowner, right? With your sales partners, you have to really make sure you're doing a good job setting the expectation of what are the cycle times going to look like in this specific area? Because especially in today's sales world where these guys are blitzing, they might be in one state for 3 months and they go to another state for a month and a half and whatever, right? They don't always know what cycle times look like, especially down to maybe even the AHJ level, as kind of Bob was alluding to, right? That they can be very different. And be able to have that data and say, hey, look, this specific HJ, even though it's all in Illinois, but hey, this HJ 30 miles this way is going to be 15 days longer, to get a permit back, right? Or versus this HJ can help set expectations and kind of help you be successful. As long as they have the proper expectations, you can succeed with them. If they don't, you're in trouble almost from the get-go.
Yep, I agree.
Gentlemen, last thing here. You guys have done a good job of creating data sets and having business intelligence curated from those sets to have actionable decisions that you make about your business. But I'm going to tell you that the vast majority of the industry is not like you. And I think most people are still trying to figure out where to start and how to begin, or if they've already started, what's the next step? So I'm asking you, like, how do you begin? Where does someone start with the analytics and the data? What's the first few steps they need to do to make sure that they have a good foundation they can grow off of? Bob, will go with you, and then if anyone wants to jump in and tag team it.
With, and I know we're not supposed to be plugging anything, but I'll plug Enerflo. With
That's
some
okay.
of the
You can plug
advanced,
Enerflo
I
in.
figured I wouldn't get too much pushback on that, but the stuff that you guys are doing on the project management side and ingesting data that has not been pulled into or a part of Enerflo is huge. And it's a new thing as a somewhat older organization, meaning in operations for 7-8 years. We had a baby step through that entire process. And I think Venki mentioned it too. If you Google the top BI tools, you can see the top 5, but none of those, or they may not be the best solution for you. So you always have to look at what are you trying to accomplish? And is the tool actually achieving what you need to accomplish? And is it the most economical route you can take? Because if you go and just get the best of the best, better hope that you have really good, flexible funding to support you. And it's not necessarily the most prudent thing to do. I think taking baby steps, if you're working to build something organically, but again, like what Enerflo is doing in the direction that Enerflo is moving in is fantastic. Like I was talking to Matt Juberfeld, he's our representative from Enerflo. And I told him, I was like, where were you 5 years ago with this technology? Because it's painful to iterate and to build all of the things, all of the data points that Robbie mentioned that he now has.
I mean,
It
he
takes
only
a
has 1,000.
he only had 1,000. Yeah. It takes a long time to do that. And as you're building your storyboard and tying everything together, you also have to appreciate that your business is going to shift. It's going to move. Like we've had to shift and move dozens of times over the past 2 or 3 years. And every time you make a move, it's going to affect your digital infrastructure. And you have to accommodate those moves throughout the data. And so it's hard, it's painful. But again, like what Enerflow built is, I wish we had that 5 years ago.
So what you're saying is take baby steps or just go with Enerflow. That makes sense. Robbie, anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that's obviously great advice. I think for us, a lot of it, the baby steps were for us just identifying the key things that we want to track, right? And I think a lot of people don't even have that identified when they're first starting, and just trying to figure out what things make a difference in your business. And then, whether it's partnering with a great tool like Enerflow or talking to other installers to learn what they're tracking, maybe that's helping their business, just trying to ask those questions to start formulating a plan of what you need to look at. But yeah.
And I think that last comment you made, Robbie, I think is really important that people have to remember this, that it's okay to ask someone else that's considered quote unquote a competitor. Like no one's really that mean anymore. Like you can have a conversation and be like, Bob, dude, like how did you start this? And like, Robbie, what are you using right now? And help me understand. At the end of the day, to Venky's point, if you can't perform cycle time, like the tools are tools, but if you can't perform, it's still going to be an issue. I see
Absolutely.
Brent just popped on, so it's probably telling us that our time is up. But
You guys can wrap if you need, whatever.
is there any questions or anything we need to answer? I don't
Nothing
know.
came in. Nothing came in from
Just-
the attendees, but I guess you guys did a great enough job answering that.
Thank you all very much, Bob, Venky, Robbie, and Venky. Do you want to send us out with the last note? Because I know you took your thing off mute, so I know you had something just
Come on, Venky, give it to us. Close us out.
get out of the park, buddy.
My only request to all my solar friends is keep your expenses low. Do not unnecessarily throw money on fancy technologies, thinking that something else is going to solve your problem. Basic frugality, spend only when it is required. And I think Bob gave some good ideas on which last mile running AHJs are going to be problems. Keep an eye on those things because those things can cost you a lot of money. If you run a truck roll for a 300-mile radius, and then so much of fuel, so much of hotel costs, so much of inflation, you may not even make any money out of a deal. So deal margins are important, frugality is important, and it's a fancy thing in solar industry to throw money in software. Do not do it. More than that, do not build your own software. That is expensive to maintain as well.
Thanks for the plugs, everybody.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all. Thanks, Scott.
Hey, yeah,
Scott.
thanks to
Thanks
everybody.
for having us on, guys.
Bob, Robbie,
See
Venky,
ya.
Scott, thanks you guys. And to our attendees who attended, you can access this in the lobby for the recordings, or you can visit enerflo.com/SolarConnect. So have
Thank
a
you.
great one. Thanks you guys. Really appreciate your time.